Originally, after the Civil War until all the way up till the 1950s and 60s, if I'm correct, the vast majority of black Americans were registered as Republicans. But there was a shift, I guess, that took place during that time period. And I'm wondering, does Winsome, does she represent in any way a movement of blacks back to the Republican Party, or an awakening to family values, conservative values on a political level? Of course, those values have always been there, but to understanding the political world through a more conservative lens? Or what do you make of her victory along those lines? Is it significant?
I think it is. And I think it's indicative of a change that's going to come. And I think that change is closer than we think, but I don't think it's going to happen overnight. People have to remember that, yes, you're right. Most Americans of African ancestry, of slave ancestry, were Republicans because, of course, Lincoln and the Republican Party were the party of anti-slavery and the party of freedom. And so it was unheard of for a black person to be a Democrat because the Democrat Party was the party of the Ku Klux Klan. It was the party of ending Reconstruction. It was the party of terrorism against black people, preventing them from voting. But something began to happen around the Roosevelt era. My father was part of that, and the people watching who are in my age group probably have parents likewise who just thought Roosevelt saved the country because of the CCC camps that my father attended that helped him get a meal, as they say, 3 hots and a cot, and allowed him to at least survive a very difficult period during the Depression. And the shift began then, and then it continued with Roosevelt integrating the military and making blacks and whites live together and ending the segregation. Of course, we know that Woodrow Wilson, as a Democrat, that had already begun in the Republicans, and then Woodrow Wilson, as a Democrat, resegregated the entire federal government. But Truman, Democrat, ended that. And then, of course, we know that, skipping ahead to Lyndon Johnson, he came up with this idea that if you did the right thing from his perspective, which turned out to be create this vast welfare state, he opined that you could have black people voting for you for 200 years, only I will not say obviously on the air, but we know he didn't refer to them as black people or Americans of African ancestry. He used another word, which apparently he used quite commonly. But over that time, and then I sort of put a cherry on top of this, the symbolic gesture of John Kennedy calling Coretta Scott King while Dr. King was in prison, and then, of course, Dr. King's father said, I am not going to vote Republican. I am going to vote Democrat. So all those things happening had a cascading effect, but that took 40 years, Richard. It took 40 years for that to happen. I believe we're going to see a shift back, and it's going to take less, because I think people are going to look at their lives and say, the ghetto still persists. My children can't walk the streets safely. They're not getting a decent education. And I don't see any hope for a better future under the policies of this party. And maybe I better give Republicans a chance. I think that's already begun, and I think we're going to see it accelerate over about the next decade or so.